Hi, it's Karen Breagy, and welcome to Black Swan Journals. Today I'm sharing a video with you about gesso, what it is, and 3 different ways you can use it. One of the subscribers in our lovely community asked me, I think she's fairly new to this sort of art, and asked if I could share what you do with gesso. So this is some of the gesso I use, Liquitex, and this is sort of like a thinner gesso. Spreads really easily, coats really well. Gesso is actually made from chalk, water, and gum. And the main purpose of it is to prime your surface. And it's mainly used on canvases so that you can prime them to receive their medium. But there's so many uses for it, and so many artists have done so many neat things with it. And a couple of things I like to do are prime dictionary book pages or any book pages, just to use them up and not throw them away. And the purpose of the gesso here is 2 things: to prime your surface so that you can now do something on it, different types of mediums. I'm going to watercolor on it after I stamp this, but you could do pretty much anything. And if you didn't use the gesso, the watercolor isn't really going to show up. It's probably going to rip the paper. It's just going to be a really not attractive result, or a failed result even. So the gesso makes the paper nice and slippery and ready to receive your medium. The other purpose of it in this instance, in my opinion, is that it pushes the text on the book page into the background and gently encourages the stamp into the foreground just by covering up the text on the gesso. So that's another kind of neat part about this. And here, this isn't really about gessoing, but I wanted to share with you, just in case you are new to this, and if you're not, you can fast forward anything, of course, you'd like. But I'm stamping a couple of things here, and I'm going to make 2 tags, and I'm using a VersaFine ink, which is a permanent ink. It's not water soluble, so when it is dry, you can go over it with water. This is very important to use this type of ink if you're going to introduce water. So that's why I chose that ink. There are others out there, but that's just the brand that I have at home. So anyway, also with these types of inks, they are a pigment ink, and they're very juicy, very wet, and you really want to let that ink soak into your paper for a while, which is why I hold it, press it evenly, really let it soak in. And this little device here, this little stamp positioner, I have, and sometimes I use it, sometimes I don't. Here I'm only using it to let the spongy part of this device provide a cushy surface beneath for me. And here I'm just showing you the difference between stamping it once, stamping it twice. Here I'm checking it with my finger to make sure it's dry before I move on. Super important that it's dry before you introduce any kind of wet media. Now I'm going to watercolor the image, and here are the brushes that I'm using. I actually don't really end up using those. I just end up using one to sort of wet my paper. The water pens that I'm using are called Poetique, and I got those on Amazon. I used one card from Tim Holtz, and I used that as a template, and then I used junk mail to make other cards. So I bought those once to use, and then now I just keep it and make my own, and I use that as a guide, as a template. So there's that. And what am I doing next? Oh, we're gonna line them up, punch my hole in the junk mail one, using the guide of the original. And now I'm going to collage a tag with the gessoed paper with the girl that I watercolored. And what I wanted to show you real quick here, in case you don't know, is I printed these out from the Graphics Fairy. I'm a member there. They do have free things as well, though. And I'm not affiliated with them in any way, shape, or form, although I wouldn't mind being if they're listening. But I'm not. I'm just trying to help you all know where these things came from, just in case you'd like to know. I know it's frustrating, you know, when I used to watch videos and when I was learning and trying to understand where to get things, and I always appreciated when people shared that information. So anyway, here I'm just sharing a little bit of how I collage, and if anyone wants like a full real-time video on my technique and my thought process while collaging, I'm happy to make one. But that can be very tedious and boring to some to watch, so I cut some of that out here. But I put in a little, just so you could see a little bit of my thought processes. And let's see, I think I'm just deciding where to place, what to use. Coming up too is going to be how I ink some of the finer details of the edges of these cutouts. And here sometimes I use, you know, something blank to cover something up so I can get a better visual of what a finished product would look like. And here we go. This is pretty much what I'm settling on. And now I'm showing you how to ink some of the detailed edges. Basically, I just bend. These you don't need to because they're straight. But up at the top of the flower, when it gets intricate and you cannot fit your device in there, your tool in there, I just bend the flower part forward or the paper forward, ink in that crease, and then bend it back. I'm gentle with my bend so that I don't crease the paper. If you do crease it, a lot of people don't mind. If you do mind, you can take a bone folder and, oh, I'm using one right now. You can take a bone folder and you can work the crease out 9 times out of 10 because paper is just fibers, and you can work the fibers to how you want them, you know, manipulate them. So here I'm just trimming my tag, trimming the little edges. Earlier I was trying to tell you that yellow flower, I was trying to tell you that I printed those out from the Graphics Fairy, and I didn't like the white copy paper, so I took a distress ink, a distress oxide up there in the left, and I just colored it with that ink to get rid of the white and antique the paper. It's an inexpensive trick to do that rather than, you know, print it on like parchment paper, which is pricey. Here's a little trick I do sometimes to color that when I want to be quick about it. Other times when I want to be more dressy, I make some very lovely, you know, detailed 3-dimensional little round, you know, reinforcers to glue down. But today I'm just giving the indication of a fake one with ink. And here I had a lovely piece of antique lace that was cream colored, and I really wanted to make it a little hint of that mahogany color, so I inked it up with the mahogany oxide ink. Here you can take a Sharpie or any kind of pen like that that's permanent, and you can, you know, blacken up that inside so that that white disappears. If you have glued cards together, you get that white inside. You can make it disappear by coloring it with black. Here I'm just inking up a little saying I have, golden light, because as I looked at the finished tag, she looked golden to me. She looked like she was in golden light. And here's a way you can distress edges if you don't have room to tear, like hand tear. Just take your scissors and distress. Okay, so that tag was finished, and the finished look will be coming up. But here's the second one I'm beginning to watercolor with the same Poetique pens. And again, it's on gesso. So the purpose of the gesso, you really couldn't do this with those pens or any kind of watercolor without that primed gessoed surface. It really doesn't show up. Paper can be very thirsty. Also, it can rip the paper depending on what you're using. Paper's important depending on what media you're doing. So gesso really helps eliminate that problem. So here I'm just sort of adding some, you can let these things dry just like you would with regular watercolor and come back and deepen them up. Go over with different colors or just the same color to deepen up. And like with most watercolors, these dried slightly lighter than when they were wet. I once told a carpenter that I wanted a deck he built to always look the same as it did when it was raining because the mahogany stain was so lush and gorgeous when it was wet. And when it was dry, it was so faded out looking. But, I was kidding. We had a good laugh. But yeah, so here's the sunflower pretty much finished now. And I'm happy with that. And by the way, these things will be going in a journal that I'm making for my mom. I've been talking a lot about that on my various videos. Also, I'm brand new to YouTube. I just started, and this is maybe like my 10th or 11th video. So I'm happy to be here and so excited to grow with you. So here I'm using a piece of another way to use gesso that's coming up. And it's dried, it's finished. And here I'm showing you an example of how you can use the thing that I showed you can make with gesso. That's also a piece that was made with gesso. And I'm utilizing that too to give you ideas of what you can do with these things. And on the back of this tag now is just a little bit more collaging, that same ribbon, but I darkened it to make it look more like a branch. Now I'm giving it some black ink to shadow it, give it an anchor so it's not floating. I'm doing the same behind the image of the owl just to give it a little bit of an anchor so it's not floating. Here's a little still shot. Oops, there's a sneak peek of what's coming up. I didn't mean to show that. But there's a still shot of the 2 finished tags that we just did. Here's another technique now of how to use gesso. And this is to make a texture paste. You do not need to buy expensive texture paste if you don't want to. You can make it. Here I'm just using baking soda and gesso. Play around with it. Play around with the parts, but basically it's pretty much equal parts. And then you're going to get a nice mix. If you want it thicker, you do more baking soda. If you want it thinner, more watery, then you do less baking soda, more gesso. So I've mixed it, got it to the consistency I want it. You can use it white if you want to. Everybody, what am I saying? A lot of people do. But you can also color it, and a lot of people do that as well. You can basically take any acrylic paint that you want and tint it to any color you want. And there are a lot of companies out there, and man, don't hate me for this, but that sell this product like done up in a jar in every color under the sun, and that just results in so much carbon footprint, so much waste of packaging, so much storage in your home. And you basically just need 1 or 2 jars and you can make your own colors. I think that's amazing. So anyway, if that's up your alley, maybe leave me a comment and give me a thumbs up. And maybe you'd like to subscribe if you like this sort of content. And if you'd like to make a friend, and I would love to make friends that have shared interests. So here we go. So now I used a stencil. I basically took a palette knife and I buttered it up and pasted it on just like you're frosting a cake, peeled up the stencil, and it was gorgeous. The thicker you put it on, the more dimensional it was going to be. The thinner you put it on, the flatter it will be. Okay, set that aside to dry for a long time, that paste. I let mine dry overnight, but it's just because I did it late at night and then I went to bed. But I would say a couple of hours anyways, and then test it with your finger. So here I'm using the stamp repositioner as it's meant to be. And the reason why I'm doing this is because I want to make sure I get a really good impression And the purpose of the repositioner gives you multiple chances of making another impression without having to throw away your card and start over, because it keeps it in the same place, as you'll see in a second. If you know all about this, please just fast forward. But if you need to learn this, I'm including it for you. So now when you flip the lid over, it gives you your first impression. Like I said, give it a nice press, let that ink soak in. That's juicy pigment ink. Let it be for a minute. And then when you lift the lid, if you're not happy with your impression, the beauty of the repositioner is you can ink that stamp up again and put it back down. Or just put it back down without inking it up and pressing it in areas that you needed it to a little more. And you can do that as many times as you need to without ever having that hassle of wrecking it and then having to keep starting over on new card. So when a good impression is important to you, that's when I use one. So now, here's that impression underneath my hand that we just made. And now I have a stencil. And so that impression, by the way, is on gessoed paper. If I did not gesso that paper, this technique called the resist technique could not happen. So what's happening here is everything is gessoed underneath. Oh, I'm so sorry. It isn't gessoed underneath. I'm putting it down now. The gesso is going down now on cardstock. And that girl that we just impressed, she's right under my finger. And I'm now painting on the gesso just as it is, not as a paste. I put a little glue in it as well. I don't think you need to do that, but I did that to make it more of a sealant, and I'll explain why in a second. But anyway, so now I'm painting on that mixture of gesso and just a little squirt of liquid glue. Any kind of white, liquid school glue, PVA glue, stuff like that. Or if you don't have that and you might have a Mod Podge, that would be good too. Just a little touch of that mixed in with the PVA. So I'm putting it all over the stencil in the parts that are negative, and that's applying this mixture to the card beneath. Also, it's very important to let you know that if you try this technique, I chose to put a mask over the stamped fairy girl that we just made previously. And how I made that mask and what a mask is something to cover up the image that you don't want to get something on that you're now applying. Do you follow what I mean? So I took some packaging that was like, acetate plastic, and I fussy cut over the stamped fairy image, and bingo, now you have a mask. And the cool thing is you only need to do this once, and you can save that permanently if you'd like to use it again for another project in the future. So keep it with your stamp. So anyway, now that mask, that acetate that had been fussy cut, is protecting that black ink from getting the gesso on it. That's the purpose of a mask. So I'm hoping to share some things that you may not know here. Some multiple tips are kind of loaded here in this video. But also, you may be seasoned and know this, and I may be boring you to death. If that's the case, I'm so sorry. Fast forward. But anyhow, or maybe it's just relaxing to watch somebody make something even though you know what you're doing. But so anyhow, I think I'm pretty much done here with my coverage. So now I'm setting this aside, and I'm setting it aside for overnight again, I think, because again, I did it close to bedtime. So, but if you didn't do it close to bedtime, it depends on how thickly you put your product and how much of the glue you used. So you really just have to kind of test it with your finger, and when it's completely dry and non-tacky, it's dry and ready to go. So here comes the really cool resist part and what that means, what this third technique, this creative third technique is, the resist. So what's going to happen here is I'm putting down You need to use permanent inks here, like dye inks, pigment inks. I wouldn't use an oxide ink because that can be reactivated with water. And you don't want to do that. You will ruin your project, and I'll explain why in a minute. So you want to use a pigment ink or a dye ink here. This brand is pretty readily available in the box stores. That's why I'm choosing it to show it to you, so because you can probably get it easily in your area. But you could certainly use a better quality. But this came out awesome. I had no qualms with the quality. So, so what's happening here is that gesso is down now that we put on under the stencil. And the mask is also still over that stamped fairy, okay? We have not peeled up that plastic mask yet, that acetate. So now what's happening here is as I spread an ink blend, the pigment inks over it, the paper where the gesso where it didn't receive gesso because the stencil wouldn't let it. Do you see what I mean? The paper is absorbing that ink. Because there is no gesso, it is not primed by the gesso. So the paper is thirsty and it's going to soak that up. And it's not going to move easily either. Like say you had no gesso, it would be difficult to blend the ink nicely. It would be difficult. Like up in the right-hand corner, I've got hard lines from stamping my brush. It's difficult to blend without the gesso. So, but the cool thing here is it's going to look awesome once I reveal it. So now I'm going to go in with all three colors and blend them together. I went from dark to light, and I go back and forth. I don't just do it once. Like once I'm done with the third color, I will go back in with multiple colors until I'm satisfied with all of the blending lines and the saturation, meaning how like much color I've got down. So also inks tend to dry a little lighter here, so I keep that in mind when I'm doing it. But if you aren't happy, you could let it dry and then look at it and do it again before you reveal it. So here's what I'm saying. I'm going over it more because I want it more intense, more saturation. And I want the blend from one color to the next to be better, a better graduation and not a harsh line. It just looks so much more dreamy when the colors melt into each other. It's like, I just love that. Don't you love that? So, okay, here comes a really cool part. So now you take a baby wipe. You could probably use a lint-free cloth that's damp to be better to the environment. I just happen to have these. They're super old. They may not even have any baby wipe juicy in them anymore, but they did. So here's the magic. So you take that baby wipe or your wet cloth and you wipe down the whole piece. And what is happening here is because we gessoed, the gesso doesn't allow the ink to sit while it's wet. Meaning it made it primed so that you can remove it easily and or leave it there and blend easily over it. So, but I don't want to blend. I want to remove it to create this high contrast of where the ink took onto the paper, it dyed right into the ungessoed paper, and then we're removing the ink off of the gesso, which creates the high contrast, which is the resist technique. So I hope that makes sense to you. And it may be old hat or it may be like too much, depending on where you're at. But so here I'm peeling up the mask and you can see what happens. That original color of the cardstock is protected under there. But I'm not happy with that. So I take it further. And I want to watercolor that white just to make it blend more with the rest of it. Because as you can see, the gesso turns the paper sort of off-white, an antique-y, yellowy off-white. So the paper no longer has a representation of that stark white. So I decided to do a little more. But I stamped a sentiment here. So that's, you know, beautiful things happen. And I know it doesn't always feel that way, as Janet Nash can remind us. Janet Nash on YouTube, I love her. And I know they don't always feel like they're happening, but they can, and they do, and they probably are, even when it feels like they're not. And they are, but we're just not able to notice in those moments, and that's okay. We come back around, and we get out of it, and then we notice. So yeah, here I was just cleaning off my stamp and giving it another impression, because I'll probably cut that out and use it in another project. Here is something super exciting, and I'm so excited. I've never done this before, never done this technique. I've had that in my stash for a long time. Not that I'm afraid to use it, but just like, you know, you haven't done it before, just stick with something, you know what I mean? So now, nope, I'm going to break out of it, and I'm going to try something new and just go for it. So I had this idea. I guess I'm not watercoloring the white part of the fairy yet, but we'll get there. Sorry about that. So I had this idea that I would use glue, wet glue, and draw with the wet glue right out of the bottle some lines as if she's sprinkling fairy dust. And then I used that gold foil that I showed you on camera for the first time ever, and basically I showed you how I put it on there. And I put it on with that brush, and I'm sure it is not perfect for all you people that do that in Guild. I'm so sorry. I'm sure it's like blasphemy to you. But I thought it was really beautiful when I was done, and I was super happy with the flashy technique it gave, and the fairy dust that she's sprinkling. I just thought that is beautiful thing happening right there. So now, as promised, I'm going to watercolor the white part, and there is no gesso on this. So I'm adding a little bit of water first, just so that the paint, when I put it on there, it doesn't just make a hard dot or harsh line, because this is not watercolor paper. This is just regular, like 110-pound cardstock, that white cardstock. Here I'm showing you how you can create many, many colors with a basic kit that you get. And I did not have that gorgeous indigo violet-y color there in my kit pre-made, so I mixed colors together to create it. Basically went around the fairy, and I also put some color on the wings. And here I'm excited to have a little piece of dark chocolate. I'm trying to get my magnesium up, or potassium, I forget which one, but it's got a decent amount of one of those in the dark chocolate, and I guess it's in the cocoa, right, in that bean, that plant or whatever. So here I was using another piece of what's coming up, and another piece, and showing you how you can use the things you create with gesso. I'm incorporating another piece of how I use gesso onto this card. So now okay, so here's a bonus. I think this is actually a fourth technique, and so I guess it's a bonus. If this is boring you, just go buy it. I'm so sorry, but hopefully you're liking it. So here, basically, I'm showing you on a piece of primed paper with gesso and a piece of unprimed paper, no gesso. And the paper is regular copy paper, like, you know, your cheap 24-pound store brand, like cheapo, paper. So it's thin and it is not meant for water. This is the gessoed one. I'm spraying water on it. I took oxide inks, put them on a piece of like packaging, reusing just waste, and just smushing around the colors, moving, first you spray it with water, smush around the colors, and now you can spray more water. You don't have to, but you can, and what this does is just it moves it around even more, and I'm going to show you how, because I put gesso, this is another reason why you use gesso. You can see the ink is fluid and it's moving. It's like pouring paint, you know what I mean? So now I'm going to show you what happens if you don't use, nope, I'm still putting more on to show you it's still wet and see how much it really moves around. And this simply won't happen on the other paper because it wasn't primed with gesso. So I'm going to show you real quick here how it I'm going to do the same things, get it wet, put the inks down, and it basically kind of just makes harsh marks because it's not primed. But you know, a lot of people would think this is beautiful, and I think it is as well. It just depends on what you like and what you think and what grabs your heart. But if you're into moving it around to create effects, this isn't going to do that. So it kind of just looks like the ink pads, the squares. But that, you know, that's wicked cool, actually. Oh, I'm so sorry. Where I live in New England, like near Boston, I'm in New Hampshire, though, but wicked is a thing we say. And it basically just means like very much so. So I apologize for that slip. But yeah, you can see here how it just isn't moving. It's just staying there. And this one is still moving. Even though I set it off to the side and did all that work with you in real time, this one is still moving around thanks to the gesso. Okay, and here's a shot of the finished tags, that finished card. And thank you so much. I really appreciate everybody being here, anybody who's interested in my videos. It just means the world to me. I've been wanting to connect with artsy people or people that are beginning.